It is The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. We are pleased to welcome Christopher Dickey, foreign editor of the Daily Beast, who I assume has a twin brother, because there's also another Christopher Dickey, I don't know if you know him, who's soon coming out with a book called Our Man in Charleston, Britain's secret agent in the Civil War South. Have you met the gentleman?
Yeah, that's me too, yeah.
Oh, that's you as well, okay.
Yeah, that's my, that's the Dr. Jekyll part of it.
Okay. And that's a book about the American Civil War.
Yeah, it's about the lead up to the American Civil War and how it was decided almost before it was begun.
All right, and it takes place in Charleston, which we'll be talking about.
It does, and a lot of the thinking 160 years ago lingers in Charleston today.
We'll also be talking about it with Christian Wernicke, a Paris correspondent for Süddeutsche Zeitung. Nice to see you again, sir. Welcome back as well to Antonio Di Bella, who is Paris correspondent for Italian state broadcaster La Rai, and Catherine Field, who covers all things print and radio for New Zealand media. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me back, Francois.
The World This Week, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24Debate. We don't know what was going through the mind of 21-year-old Dylan Roof, but it's not just any church that was the target of an horrific shooting spree. 9 killed, including the pastor of Mother Emanuel Church, a landmark house of worship for African Americans, the target of white-on-black attacks for more than a century.
All my prayers go out to the families. My prayers go out to everyone for us to come together and be stronger and to love one another all the same.
50 years ago, Martin Luther King was in that building, and it looks like it was yesterday. This is racism, in its purest form.
Christopher Dickey, what conclusions can we draw at this particular point about this attack? And it's always the question of an individual and a social context.
Absolutely. I mean, there are two distinct issues here. One is, who is this guy? Was he acting alone? Is he just some psycho who identified with these racist causes, or did he come out of a deeper culture of racism? Both of those things are possible, in fact. He could be a psycho who came out of a deeper culture of racism. But then there's the question of the impact of this, the effect of it. And there is a cumulative effect in the United States. After all the controversy and the unrest that surrounded the killing of various young black men by police in different parts of the country, north and south, including in North Charleston just a few months ago, all that has built up a kind of a huge tension in the United States, but also a desire to try and rethink where we thought we were in terms of racism in the United States.
Because there was this narrative with the election of a first African-American president that we were heading towards, what was the term, a post-racial society?
Yeah, that was always a fantasy. When you look at the number of young black people who are in jail, when you look at the existing segregation in American society, de facto segregation, the idea of it being a post-racial society was at best wishful thinking and at worst a mask for all the problems that continue to exist.
Now, among those denouncing the hate, the governor of South Carolina, Republican Nikki Haley, she has called for the death penalty for this young man, and yet the Confederate flag still flying over the Capitol. The main U.S. advocacy group for African Americans, the NAACP, wants it taken down. By the way, it's not flying at half-mast, Christian Wernicke. It's at full mast, the Confederate flag.
Because the law says they can't take it down. They fought for years about to get the flag from the State House. Well, anyway, I find it, as somebody who has worked for 8 years as a journalist in the U.S., I find it utterly frustrating. I've been, during the Obama campaign, that period of hope for the blacks, for the African Americans. I've been in this town. I've done feature stories. I spoke to people of that church, not to the priest who was killed. In a way, it's also political tragedy apart from the personal tragedy, because it really tells us that Obama is in a way just a veil. There hasn't been enough change that he wanted to bring and that he promised to bring, and especially in states like South Carolina with a deeply rooted racism and a deeply rooted social injustice. This is very, very frustrating.
Antonio Di Bella?
The same, as my colleague said, I was covering America, I was covering the Rodney King case in California. All the same. Riots, violence, and the deep distrust between the two communities. And even Obama, I don't think it's perceived, but our colleague can explain better than me, as a deep Afro-American, because he's son of a white woman and of a black immigrant. In some way, not the root, even if he worked in the root movement in Chicago, but is not perceived as the descendant of slaves. And so he has not a reach to change something so difficult, like explode in a way that we've seen. And impressed me, the flag and the Rhodesia flag on the T-shirt of the guy. So nothing looks change in the South of America and also in
it's not only in the South.
Not only in the South.
Yeah.
Things haven't changed, and yet America has changed. We see the demographic makeup has changed. It's not what it was 30 years ago.
Well, I think on this particular issue, you're looking at, if you like, the two real nerve points of America, guns and race. If you like, this is their Jerusalem. You start touching this and you're really going to touch a nerve. And I think, first of all, we have to be clear. What's going to happen about gun control? Absolutely nothing. Nothing's going to happen. And what's going to happen this weekend? Everyone's going to start buying more guns and more ammunitions because rumors are going to be put around by certain organizations that gun control is going to be coming in. It's a real deep problem that has to be addressed much, much deeper than just saying gun control. You've got to start talking to people about what is a community. You've got to get into schools. It just really, we're talking about grassroots.
It runs, if you want to talk about the guns issue, and that runs so deep. It runs as deep as racism in American society. I've been posting passages from William Howard Russell's diary traveling through the United States in 1861, including the southern United States. He's in Mississippi, and he's writing about people carrying guns everywhere they go and shooting each other in bars and shooting each other all the time with virtually no penalty. And he says, how can this be a civilized society? And in fact, the issues that he's talking about, the sacredness of guns in American society, is something he was talking about 164 years ago.
All right, and in remarks made hot on the heels of the arrest, the U.S. president pointed to what, well, I guess the rest of the world can seem like the bleeding obvious.
Let's be clear. At some point, we as a country will have to reckon with the fact that this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries. It doesn't happen in other places with this kind of frequency.
And yet there was defeatism in his voice because he said that I know nothing's going to get passed.
That's the point. I was impressed by a comment by Jon Stewart, the comedian, who say if this guy who killed was an Islamist or something, a terrorist from Islam, he would invade and make a war and send drone and make a big debate. Now we're going to do what? Nothing. And that's it. That's powerless. Even Obama is powerless in this moment.
And that's actually a point made by one of the columnists in the Daily Beast this Friday.
Yeah, Dino Bedella, who's written this and about a couple of other things. He's normally a comedian, but he gets very serious when he writes about this kind of thing. And he's exactly right. I mean, I totally agree. If this were, can you imagine, if it was a guy who had a long beard and was wearing a thobe and he'd walked into that church and pulled out a .45 and killed 9 people, or especially if he'd killed 9 white people, what would the consequences have been? What would the reaction have been? Would that have prompted a national dialogue about how we should think about things? No. It would have prompted more Islamophobia, more hatred of Islam, more attacks, probably.
Which brings us back to the governor. She calls it an act of hate, and she's calling for the death penalty. What could she do more?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to try and start educating the people of the United States, as you were suggesting, and particularly the people of South Carolina, which in many respects is my home state. My father lived there for 25 years. To start to think seriously about issues of racism. You know, that Confederate flag, you know, that flies over. If you say in South Carolina that the Civil War was about slavery, people will say, no, it wasn't about slavery. It was about states' rights. Yeah. Well, then if you look at it a little bit more closely, which they don't, what you discover is the state right that they were defending was the right to own other human beings with black skins. That was the state right that people were fighting for. And yet it all gets very murky when you get down there because the education is not an education that deals honestly with that, or with many other issues. I mean, we won't get sidetracked on evolution and questions like
And is
that,
it still
but
the
it's
same?
insane.
Is it still the same South Carolina that you knew as a child?
No, it's improved in a lot of ways. I mean, I was just corresponding with a black woman who's a good friend of mine in South Carolina, very middle class, and she was in Charleston. She went down to Charleston the morning after the shooting, and she was saying, this isn't us, this isn't South Carolina. This isn't typical of South Carolina. And she pointed out that a lot of the really incendiary stuff on social media is coming from people outside the state trying to whip up racial anger, which, by the way, is exactly what this kid, this Mr. Roof, was trying to do when he went into that church.
Right.
On the other hand, yes, this is not us. I know. I heard this so often as a correspondent when I was in the U.S., and the people you always talk to are the gentle ones, the nice ones. South Carolina has a very nice atmosphere most of the time. But when you look at what we call structural issues, South Carolina is one of the worst states of all of them. I mean, look at expenses for education. Look at the social and economic segregation that still persists in this country. They have what the Americans call dropout factories, public schools mainly for the minorities, meaning in South Carolina basically meaning the black population, that produce 45 to 60%, even more of failed school careers for black students. And what you have here as somebody who committed the crime, according to what I have read, is a typical case of what American call, when they don't speak politically correct, they call it white trash. And,
is that not correct? We can't say that?
No, what I learned in the U.S., you shouldn't say it, but it comes pretty close to the reality. Yes.
Hell yeah, he's white trash.
Yeah.
I mean, he epitomizes
but he's a result
trash.
of South Carolina society. It is us. It is them.
But what happens in a society when, as you said, white trash's father gives him that gun for his 21st birthday, when he knows that kid has been stuck in his bedroom for the last 2 years, barely going out.
So it's nuclear
trash. Hasn't got a job.
Well, it happened in Connecticut too.
Yeah, Newtown, Connecticut.
Exactly. Yeah,
where
he got it from his mother,
and whom he killed.
Yeah.
So it's not only the South.
No,
you're right about
the South.
and it's not only South Carolina.
No,
you are right about South Carolina. Some of it is genuinely third world in the educational level. Why? Because in South Carolina, they hate the idea of government and they hate the idea of taxes. And the idea, let's just expand this a bit. What's the idea of the Tea Party? It's to turn the entire United States into South Carolina. So that's what we're looking at here.
And which brings us to the other topic on this issue that we're following, which is with the fault lines entrenched. How does it all bode for next year's U.S. presidential election? The Republican field did indeed get more crowded this week. The former Florida governor Jeb Bush, brother and son of ex-U.S. presidents, announcing, thus raising the prospect of another Bush v. Clinton race in the fall of 2016. Now, he is a moderate by Republican standards on issues such as immigration. Polls suggest he's the frontrunner, albeit a vulnerable one. Hence, many others throwing their hat into the ring.
I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me. And I'll build them very inexpensively. I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words. Nobody would be tougher on ISIS than Donald Trump. Nobody.
Catherine Field.
Well, where was it I read recently? Someone described this bunch of Republican presidential hopefuls as they should just put them in a clown car and take them somewhere. And he was making comparisons to this as being like in The Simpsons, the school bus that they go off on, that Bart gets onto, that everyone's sort of not really playing with a full deck. They're all playing around and nothing much is going to happen. I just want to wait for a couple more months to see how this all shakes out, who actually ends up. And then I think I might start taking a bit more notice about what people are saying, because if you follow this day in, day out, you're going to go bonkers.
Chris Vizicki, is that the smart thing to do? Not pay too much attention?
I think that's right. I mean, you can laugh at it, except you cry after you laugh when you look at these guys, especially if you think that one of these idiots might become president of
But they're not idiots. Hang on.
Oh,
they're
yes,
not
they
idiots.
are. They are politically idiots. When you listen to Donald Trump talk about having Mexico build an enormous wall, I will do this. Oh, yeah, Donald, you're going to do a great job of that. Also, Donald Trump has been in a business where all of his records are now going to come under a kind of scrutiny that's going to be very, very tough for any politician to withstand. All of these guys, the only one who is remotely credible as a national leader is, in fact, Jeb Bush. He is an interesting guy, and I think if Jeb Bush becomes the nominee, I think he's got a real good shot at becoming the president. I think it'll be very tough for Hillary to beat. I imagine if I were Hillary, I'd be supporting all those other candidates as much as I possibly could.
Antonio Di Bella, you mentioned you were in the U.S. during Rodney King, so you remember Bush versus Clinton. Of course, it wasn't the same Bush and it wasn't the same Clinton.
Yeah, but the problem is this one. I look to me, the society of today is remembering me the Roman Empire when transformed itself from a republic in an empire. So we're having the Bush family, the James Claudia, the wife of the Clinton, Sarkozy again himself, maybe the daughter of Berlusconi. So you no wonder why.
What a great idea that.
Well, yeah, a big family who run like in Game of Thrones, medieval times, their lands. They wonder why people don't trust in politics because they vote for families or a small group of aristocrats, so presumed aristocrats. And you need some, or the alternative is Trump. So I would like to see some new guy with politics, really politics, and so the people won't vote for Grillo or for Le Pen, and they will begin to be involved in politics. But until we see the descendant of a royal family, I have some doubt that this can be the solution for the future.
Christian Wernicke?
Well, in a way, it's a little awkward, perhaps, to draw this conclusion, but it looks as if the US gets an election they don't want, like France will get an election they don't want. It is a choice between two guys they don't want anymore. Clinton versus Bush and Sarkozy versus Hollande. It's not the most popular choice, but the difficulty in the US is you have a strong two-party system and there's no third choice. The difficulty in France is that the third choice is devastating not only for the country but also for whole Europe.
And that brings us to the topic of Europe, which we'll broach when we come back. You're watching The World This Week.